We are live in 3, 2, 1, action.
Good evening. Today is Wednesday, January 6th, 2021, and this is the Hendrick Hudson Board of Education meeting. Can I have a motion to call the meeting to order, please?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Can I get a, we're going to be moving to executive session, excuse me. The executive session will convene for the purpose of collective negotiations under the Taylor Law, medical, financial, credit, or employment history of a particular person or corporation, or matters leading to the appointment or employment history of a particular person or corporation, or matters leading to the appointment or employment or promotion or demotion or discipline or suspension or removal of a particular person or corporation. Can I have a motion to move into exec, please?
So moved.
Second.
Yep.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so for the public, we should be back on public forum at about 7 p.m. and we will see you then. Bye.
Ah.
I don't hear anything. Are we live?
We are still live.
Waiting for participants so the public can hear us, but I'm just waiting to get a quorum. Actually, I think we have a quorum now. Yep. All right, so Greg, whenever you're ready, I think we can restart the public portion of the meeting.
We are live.
All right, good evening again. Today is Wednesday, January 6th, 2021, and this is the public session of the Hendrick Hudson School Board of Education meeting. We just left our executive session. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda as stated, please?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and before we continue with our consent agenda, can we please have the Pledge of Allegiance?
Oh.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. For tonight's consent agenda, I would like to pull item fiscal 3.2, please. Does anybody else have anything that they would like to pull? Okay, then can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda, please?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Carmen, that was unanimous. All right, so items pulled from the consent agenda. Let's discuss fiscal 3.2. And Enrique, could you just explain to us what this lease agreement with Chase Bank is?
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, sure. If you remember a couple of weeks ago, the board approved the same lease agreement for $500,000. Today I received a call from state aid for state education department, excuse me, that I didn't include the interest rate. So I needed to include the interest rate. So that's why last time was 500,000. Interest rate is going to be about 18,000, but since we need to do a new lease, I put additional money just in case we need additional money, because if not, they might send it back to us. So it's just the same, but now they also want us to include the interest rates.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions about this? All right, then can I get a motion to approve item fiscal 3.2?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. Okay. Next on our items that were pulled from the consent agenda are our donations, and we have two donations this evening. The first donation is from the Hendrick Hudson Community Education Foundation, which has made a donation for Chromebook styluses in the amount of $519.74, and for elementary take-home bags for $5,122.88. That is a very generous donation from the HHCEF. They do excellent work in our community and for our schools, so appreciate that very much. And our second donation this evening is for $200 for the Diane Tangent Scholarship Fund. And the donors were Henry and Joanne Santis for $200. And thank you so much to the Santis family. Can I get a motion to approve those two agenda items, please? Those two donations.
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. All right, so that brings us to our superintendent's report.
Hey, good evening. We have a pretty thorough presentation tonight, so I'll try to keep my superintendent's comments rather brief. The first thing is Indian Point legislation. The governor signed over the holiday weekend various pieces of legislation that we have tirelessly advocated for. The school district, as well as with our friends from the village and the town, with Sandy Galiff and Pete Harcum and the governor, and we're very excited that these efforts came to fruition. Two specific pieces that are really, really important to us, or bills that were signed into law. The first is that one bill allows us to continue to have a pilot agreement with whomever runs Indian Point after closure. The law in the books right now is that municipalities, taxing jurisdictions, which we are one of them, can only have a pilot agreement with a power plant that is functioning, that is generating power in their community. As you know, Indian Point is going to close operations in the spring, and therefore, once they close, the ability for any of us, the town, the village, the county, to negotiate a pilot would be moot, because we wouldn't meet the criteria to negotiate a pilot because Indian Point is no longer producing energy. So the first bill that was signed into law allows taxing jurisdictions across New York State to enter into pilot agreements with power plants that are no longer producing energy. That's important. Why is that important? For this next piece. The next bill that was signed into law is that municipality can tax nuclear spent fuel. So as you know, one of the big hurdles and what is going to delay any potential transformation of the Indian Point campus to any sort of business or community development is the fact that for many, many decades, up to 6, spent nuclear fuel will need to be housed on that property in casks and in storage. So if you've got spent nuclear fuel that is still radioactive material and it is present, you are not going to have any sort of development taking place. There's an opportunity cost. That opportunity cost was recognized by the governor, and he signed Pete Harcum and Sandy Galiff's bill into law that allows the municipality to tax, create a value, and tax the owner of Indian Point, whomever that may be. It looks like it will be Holtec. We'll be able to assess them a tax for the spent nuclear fuel. Now, because the previous bill that was signed into law allows us to enter into a pilot, there doesn't necessarily need to be a tax. We could enter into a pilot with Holtec or whomever. So why is that important? It's important because we have now confirmed that we will receive some unbudgeted and unexpected revenue from the spent nuclear fuel at Indian Point. The revenue stream that we have right now is the existing pilot for when Indian Point closes over the next number of years and into the future. That pilot is based on the fact that the power plant will not be producing any energy. So those two bills are really, really important, or those laws now are really, really important to us. We're thankful that the governor heard us and that he signed those into law. And what that means is eventually one of two things will happen. The town, because the town is the body that assesses tax, they will assess a tax after Indian Point closes, and they will place a value on the spent nuclear fuel. And one of two things will happen. Well, one of three things will happen. That tax will be paid, and we will receive a piece of that. That tax will be contested. It's a tax certiorari. Or the third option is all the parties could agree to a pilot agreement like we had with Indian Point. So without those bills being passed, we would have absolutely no shot at increased revenue, which is something that we've been advocating for. We've advocated for the cessation fund, and that cessation fund is fully funded now. And we advocated for some increased revenue given the spent nuclear fuel that will remain on campus. So very good news. We're very excited. Still a long way to go. We, meaning the town, will need to determine what the value of spent nuclear fuel is. Good luck figuring that out, because there's not really an industry for that. But that will be an endeavor that the town begins through their research process. And if we hear that there's an interest in a pilot agreement, that's a negotiation. That negotiation would involve ourselves, the town, the village, and the county, because those 4 taxing jurisdictions are the organizations or the municipalities that receive revenue from Indian Point, whether they're functioning and producing power or they are closed and no longer producing power. So very, very good news. The math is not worked out, as I said, so we don't want to spike the football yet. There's still plenty of game to be played, but what we do know is that we will be receiving some increased, unexpected, unbudgeted revenue in future years. And that will help us do 2 things. Will help us mitigate big tax increases and will help us restore any programs or some tough fiscal decisions that we'll need to make in the next couple of years because of Indian Point closing. So we notified our community about that news. We put it online in social media, but wanted to use tonight as a opportunity to let everyone know that that's really good news. And yes, Carol?
First of all, I would like to really thank our state representatives for putting these bills forward. It was really important for our district and other districts that have nuclear power plants or other situations similar. But I was wondering, we're probably not talking months, more like years before we know what kind of valuation that property would have. Is that correct? Or any idea on some kind of a timeline? I know we're not going to count on it for next year's budget, certainly, but would we have any kind of answers for the following year's budget, perhaps?
We hope so. That would be optimistic. I certainly wouldn't anticipate anything for our upcoming fiscal year because the plant closes officially on April 30th, which means the earliest that Holtec could take over would be May 1st. So even if we were to receive any sort of value or assessive value on the spent fuel, it would basically be May and June, 2 months worth. But there are many, many procedural steps. There are opportunities for businesses to reject a tax bill or assessment, and that's a tax certiorari, and you get lawyers and courts involved. Or they may say, let's look at a long-term pilot agreement so that the municipalities have some guaranteed revenue going forward, and Holtec, a business, a for-profit business, understands what their expected expenses are. But I don't think we would really be able to even start guessing what some numbers would be until the summer. The town, the Office of Tax would have to be involved. I'm sure they've started their research. The issue is, tax laws and codes are usually written state specific, and we're not aware of any defunct nuclear power plants in New York State that have spent fuel. There's Shoreham on Long Island that never even opened up. There's ours, and then there's in Oswego, the Fitzpatrick plant, but that's still operating. So I think there's going to be a lot of research, and there'll be even some negotiations once Holtec takes over, but that is a conversation that could not even commence until May 1st.
Okay. And I'd like to thank not only Ms. Galef and Mr. Harcum, but also our advocacy team here, which included Mr. Hockreiter and Mr. Catalan, amongst other local folks. It was, due to your efforts that this was even brought in front of our legislators so that we could get this potential for revenue in. Does anybody have any other questions on this, on these 2 new laws that are being passed? All right. Thanks, Joe.
Okay. My next update is our effort toward educating our stakeholder group around the Princeton Plan. Our Princeton Plan stakeholder group representatives today met with our friends from Tarrytown. 14 committee members signed up. I think at one point we had a high of 10 that made the meeting, but for 75 minutes today, we met with a pair of principals from Tarrytown. And it was a Q&A. It was really engaging. It was enlightening. I think we all learned a lot. I think some of our anxieties were calmed. I think as questions were answered, new questions arose, and we agreed that in the next couple weeks, we may cycle back with our friends at Terrytown. But Lisa and Margaret were on the meeting, so I'll give them a moment to talk about their experience, because it really was it was fascinating hearing from a district that's maybe 12 miles away, how they're organized differently, and different things they're able to do, and even some things that they miss. But real quick, I'll let Margaret and Lisa chime in.
Lisa, you want me to go first? Okay, so yes, we did spend an hour and a half, or almost an hour and a half, with our friends from Tarrytown, and I thought that the Tarrytown representative spoke eloquently to the way that they are organized. They answered the questions that our constituents put forward. I think expanded on them. I was most appreciative of their honesty in both the things that have gone well and things that might have gone better. Both of these administrators came into the process as it was already established, but spoke to the fact that Tarrytown actually went to this program as a result of the GM plant closing years ago. All of us probably remember that. And at the time, Sleepy Hollow and Tarrytown were two separate school districts, and this brought this together and caused them to go grade span. They did highlight for us some of the things that if they could do it again, they might reconsider. But they were very strong in their presentation on the overwhelming sense of community that this organizational plan brings to their community, that kids are together from the time they're in kindergarten. And I think several times they said that we are, what was their slogan? We are all horsemen.
Horsemen.
Yes.
From the beginning, we are all horsemen. In each building, we are horsemen. So I was impressed. I really was. I was like feeling like a cheerleader by the end of their conversation with us. And it was very much conversational. So I will defer to Lisa and allow her to pick this up.
I'm going to echo everything that Margaret said. I think the one thing that I love that Margaret and I had talked about earlier is the equity. They talked so much about how the Princeton plan allowed so much equity for all the students. And even with the PTA, they described what the PTA looks like K-5 and how, there's this and this, but it's all equitable. Every student gets the same access. Same thing with the professional development for teachers. It's very thorough, it's very deep, it's very based on the content, the grade level they teach. However, if there is a change, then they're allowed this extra PD time. So I think it put to rest a little bit when we talked about PTAs and, grouping students. And the one thing that they said that I think is going to stick with all of us is kids are very resilient. It's the message we as adults and parents give to the students that is going to create that environment for the students. So if we present this in a positive way, as they did many times and gave us examples, that we will find that kids are very resilient and will be very successful. It's us as adults that will be the ones that are struggling with it. So they were able to give us a lot of insight, and I was very appreciative of their efforts and how they were able to help us.
So our next steps in this endeavor, we have a similar meeting with Ossining next week. We have 2 opportunities for stakeholder members to meet with Somers next week. And we're also setting up a meeting, sort of a parent-only meeting with some leaders of the Tarrytown PTAs. So they can meet with some of our PTA leaders and parents to get into some of the nuts and bolts on pickup and drop off and transitions and issues around friendships and those sort of things. Today, we talked about all of that today, but we also talked about academic opportunities and social emotional support. So we're next week we'll have many more opportunities for the group to get involved.
That's great. Thank you, Lisa and Margaret. It sounds like even though this had to be a remote meeting and we were hoping to have site visits and things like that, that it was still really in-depth and useful. So
Yep.
Fantastic. Good.
And my last update is we have received word from the county that they have received coronavirus vaccines and are starting to phase in vaccinating educators. And we are beginning with our school nurse team as well as our occupational and physical therapists and our speech therapists. So Lisa Schuckman, who works with that team and supervises that team, sent them specifics today on how to register for the vaccine regimen. It's being done at centrally in White Plains in a very orderly manner. So they have to show proof of employment. They have to show proof of their position in our organization. And they go on to a secure website, they create an appointment, and then they head down to White Plains and begin the process. So wanted to let everyone know that we received that good news today, and we're not sure who's next or when they will be next. The governor is sort of quarterbacking this process for New York State, and then is giving it off to each county Department of Health to coordinate at the local level. And we got the email this morning and made sure our folks knew how to sign up and when to sign up, so we can begin that process. And as we receive notice of greater eligibility for the vaccine, we'll certainly keep you in the loop as well.
That is super exciting.
With that, I'll turn it, I know Enrique's going to eat up most of our time together, but I'll turn it over to our executive team for some quick updates before we move forward. Laura, why don't we start with you?
Sure, I'll be brief. One big change for HR is that the FFCRA, which was the federal leave that was afforded for staff due to COVID, has expired. That expired at the end of December. So in 2021 now, employees still have New York State COVID leave if they haven't used it already. So that's been a big change and something we're trying to manage as we support our staff as they are managing their own, whether they're testing positive, they're a contact of a positive, or they're experiencing symptoms and needing to quarantine. And then tech-wise, we used the break to really catch up on a lot of things. So the team was in almost every day over the break. So when the buildings are closed like that, it gives them a great opportunity to really get some of the nitty-gritty work done of just inventorying and getting cleaned up. And we're in the process now to start getting ready for budgeting for 21-22 and really figuring out, what that needs to be, and really looking at a lot of infrastructure, looking at updating our Wi-Fi. So those are some of the conversations we're beginning to have right now.
Great, thank you. Lisa, you want a quick update?
We had our third installment of our mental health night on Monday. Unfortunately, it wasn't well attended, but it'll be translated and up on the website, hopefully by the beginning of next week. We are gearing up for our busy schedule of CSEs as well as 504s. We've actually started our 504s the first day we were back. We're keeping a vigilant eye on our CPSE cases and our numbers, as you know, and I've shared. Right now we have about 40, but I can anticipate between 40 and 60 kids. There's kids popping up left and right of kids coming into kindergarten that are being identified by preschools. Some kids we haven't seen names of, so we're really staying on top of that and meeting bi-monthly to update and make sure that we have those names and we're prepared in the fall for these students. That's where we are in special ed and PPS.
Thank you. Margaret?
Oh, real quickly, we are getting ready for the start of second semester. So cleaning up the transitions that we have with students who are either choosing to go remote for second semester or those students who are choosing to return to live instruction. Just making sure that all the rosters are correct and we're prepared for students going in either direction with curriculum materials and teacher awareness. We're also getting ready to launch, as of this past Monday, our after-school reading support at the elementary level. So working with those teachers to get their kids on board, to let parents know what days and times, et cetera. Again, making sure everybody has materials they need. As we draw closer to the beginning of February, I believe it is, and we do our second benchmark, we will use those results to look at math needs after school and identify the kids who may need some support. We already have some teachers who've raised their hand about that. And lastly, trying to onboard a significant number of in-service courses, since working with teachers during the day is so challenging in this environment with social distancing and a hybrid model at secondary. So we are looking to add more opportunities for after-school work for teachers with some of the consultants that we've been using over the past few years.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, does anybody have any questions for the team? Nope. All right. Excellent. Thank you for your updates. Our next item on the agenda is our committee reports. Does anybody have, we were on break for 2 weeks, so does anybody have any committee reports? Nope. Okay. That brings us to our presentation and discussion, and this kicks off our budget season.
Yeah, so Enrique is going to walk us through a very thorough budget presentation, which is anchored by a number of fantastic pieces of artwork from our students. This is the beginning of budget season, and this is a 30,000-foot overview. Well, I'm sorry, this is typically a 30,000-foot overview of our projected expenses and revenues, some trend data, and some projections going forward. This is a bit unique year to present a budget and prepare a budget because we are in the middle of a pandemic. We're not entirely sure we will be out of the pandemic when we start our new fiscal year, which is July 1st. We're not sure what the academic program or expectations will be for next September. And also, as I mentioned earlier, we have we're going through the process of evaluating whether or not to move to the Princeton plan at the elementary level, which will show you some additional savings if we choose to do that for next fiscal year. So this is going to be a little more involved with more breadth and depth than in a typical budget kickoff presentation, but really important information for the board and the community to understand as we go forward. So I'll turn it over to Enrique.
Before Enrique kicks it off, since this is a little bit more in depth than usual, can we stop periodically every slide or every couple of slides just to make sure nobody has questions? Since we're not all together in the same room, it's a little bit more difficult to make sure that we're getting everybody's concerns met. And I think if we wait until the end, it's going to be too much to go all the way back through that whole thing.
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. As always, I'd like to start by showing the great art that is produced in the high school. As you can see, this is a beautiful picture. So next slide, please. So we're going to start by talking a little bit about the financial impact of COVID and the closure of Indian Point. Next. Let's start with COVID. The good news about the financial impact is that in last year, in the year 2019-2020, because of the closure, we saved $3.2 million, and those $3 million went to the fund balance. So now we have $3.2 million more in fund balance that we were expecting. However, this year is exactly the opposite. This year, there's been a substantial increase in expenses in our budget due to the COVID. First of all, we had to add 5 additional teachers at an approximately cost of $450,000. We needed to spend money in PPE, in masks, cleaning supplies, etc., at a cost of over $200,000. That includes some of the equipment that we had to buy for disinfecting and everything. Unemployment benefits this year are up to $120,000. Just to give you an example, last year our unemployment benefit expenditure was only $5,000. Although some of these expenditures were fighting, we are not getting money back. what the Labor Department has told us is that we will get credit for the future. So we are not expecting to get this money back this year or next year, but we're going to get a credit for the next, who knows, 5, 10 years. Also, we've done some technology upgrades. We've bought some software. We bought more Chromebooks that we usually would have done in a normal year. If you remember, Laura said that we had to increase the width of the bandage for the internet connection, and we needed some additional support, and that cost around $100,000 that we were not planned. And finally, we had some overtime custodians because if you remember last December, all the custodians in the middle school had to quarantine. So we need to still clean the buildings and do the usual work. So we had to pay overtime for that. So those have been our increased expenses that I calculate is about 800,000 to 900,000. On the other hand, we've seen some savings, about $25,000, and that's because not all the athletic and clubs run this year. So we save in salaries for coaches and club advisors. We save for gas and diesel that buses didn't run. And then also we save some money when schools were closed because we didn't have to pay for diesel and gas. And also the same for anyone that is going out of district and they close their school, we didn't have to pick them up. So I think that difficult to know, but I estimate approximately $25,000 in savings. Any questions? Because this is an important one. No questions? Next one, please. Indian Point, as we all know, is closing. Last year, the first nuclear reactor closed. This year in April, the second one is closing. And because our fiscal year starts July 1st, this is the first year that we got a reduction on the first nuclear facility. This April, the second one is going to close. So next year, we're going to have the second year of the first reactor that has been closed and the first year of the second reactor. So in that sense, the original agreement says that the following year that the nuclear reactor closes, we will be reduced by 30%, an additional 30% the next 2 years, and then it will stay at 10% until 2025, which is the year that the pilot expires. Fortunately enough, we were able to negotiate with Hendrick for 2 years additional money, and for the year 2020-21, this year and next year, we're adding an additional $2.5 million to the pilot payments. So instead of being a 30% reduction and another 30% reduction for the first 2 years, it was only a 25% reduction the first year and 50% reduction the second year. So that added $2.5 million in total for the 2 years. Any questions?
Not a question, but I'd just like to point out that, again, this was some excellent advocacy work. Thank you for renegotiating that pilot payment.
Thank you. So next, please. So here you can see the pilot payments starting in 17-18, how they were close to $25 million, and the red portion is a portion that we lost due to the closure. So this is just to show you how much we're losing in pilot payments on a yearly basis. It's very visual, and you can see the hit specifically in the 21-22 school year that it's going to be next year. Next, please. This is beautiful art, thank you. And then we can move to the district reserves. Like Joe has been saying for a couple of years, since we learned about the closure of Indian Point, we have tightened our belts. And as you can see, our unassigned fund balance has been growing substantially since then. The maximum that we are allowed by the state is 4%. So as you can see, we are way above that. Every year, our auditors have to report that, but we know it's needed. So, but the good news is that our unassigned fund balance is up to $10.2 million. And our total fund balance is getting close to $12 million. We will use that going forward to reduce taxes for the community. That's the only reason we're doing it. Next.
Enrique, I had a quick question about that. I remember several years ago and in the past couple of years, we've been talking about needing to have the community needed to vote to create a fund that would be used for the power plant cessation fund or for any funds that we get instead of going into the unassigned fund balance. It would be a specific fund for the Indian Point closure monies to go into. Are we still going to need to do that, or what is the plan with that?
Unfortunately, the way they wrote the law, it was very difficult for us to do it for several reasons. They were never able to tell us if we can replenish it. We had so many questions, and it was so difficult to understand and to see how it can benefit us that we decided that we will instead keep it in unassigned fund balance and just get the comment from our auditors. Joe can tell you a little bit more about the conversations that he had with the SED and the state, but they got nowhere, and the way they wrote the law, it was really not convenient for us to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Ally.
So other than the $3.2 million that we saved from the COVID closures last spring, how have we been able to grow our fund balance like this? Where is this money coming from?
Well, it's coming from many places. Just to give you an example, last year we refinanced a bond, and because of interest rates are much lower, so we're going to save about $70,000. Joe and Margaret and Laura and Lisa have been reducing expenses from teachers, from many ways that we can reduce expenses. For example, we are reducing expenses in utilities. We've done solar power that saves us about $100,000 a year. We did some upgrades in our facilities that it's saving us a lot of money in utilities. So it's across the board. We've been looking at all our expenditure base, and we are trying to reduce the cost.
And let me also weigh in else that may help. When we put our budget together, it's a process from January until April. And we have to have our budget basically done in April, sent to the controllers, sent to state ed, and then we educate our community before they vote on it. So we're making a decision right now in January for expenses, estimating expenses that we will have in 6 to 18 months from now. So a lot of things change, and they change in our favor, and sometimes they do not change in our favor. One year we had a huge balance because the cost of diesel went down because we had a warm winter. A number of different factors that just happenstance that happen or occur that are sort of out of our control that create a positive or a negative either way, because it can burn us the other way. If we have a really, really cold winter, or the price of gas and energy or electricity goes up, and we budgeted based on the trend analysis, but something, really crazy happened. So this is not uncommon for a school district that has a budget between 75 and 80 million, but we also find opportunities during the year to reduce expenses because we're 12 months after we approve the budget, and sometimes things change, or we have to readjust some of our needs.
Right, and just to clarify for Ally, since this is her first budget, usually if we were going above the maximum allowed by the state on our fund balance, we would apply that fund balance to the budget the following year and lower our tax levy in that way, so that we weren't going above maximum federal or maximum state allowed balance. But since we're trying to save for our anticipated revenue loss, we've decided to put extra into that fund balance and just take this slap on the wrist basically from the state, who are kind of, they know what our circumstance is, so they're giving us a little bit more leeway than they might otherwise.
Great, thank you to all of you.
Next. So here you have our budgeted amount and our actual expenses. And obviously, like I mentioned, for the 2019-2020, a substantial part of our expense reduction was because we were closed from March to June. So that's why you can see how our budgeted amounts are substantially higher than our actual expenses. And also what we've done is we apply for federal and state grants. And this is the graph that shows how we're going to get the cessation fund money. These are the numbers, and this is based on this. That's what I'm doing for my projections on cessation fund. So as you can see, the total is $64 million, but every year is a specific amount. It's use it or lose it. So the cessation fund, that's what we're getting, and that's how we're applying it to our budgets going forward. So for next year, we're applying to our budget as part of our revenues for the first time, $8.6 million of cessation fund. Next. So, and here you can see our revenues by year and by type of revenue. As you can see, for example, in the year 2021 compared to 21-22, you can see obviously how the portion of the pilot is reduced, and it's make up for cessation fund. And you can look at it from how it was distributed from 15-16 to 21-22. And in the graph beyond, you can see the changes in revenue by type of revenue. You can see how tax levy, some years went down, then it went up a little bit, and then obviously last year and this year we're expecting it to go up a little bit more. But the important one again is comparing 2021 to 21-22, you can see how the pilot in 2021 goes down substantially, but it's made up of the cessation fund that we didn't have before. Next. Any questions before we start talking about the budget? Okay, for the budget this year, we're doing it very different than in the past because we have 4 scenarios that can happen next year. Scenario number 1 is that we stay with our neighborhood schools. Scenario number 2 is that we do Princeton plan. Scenario number 3 is that we stay with our neighborhood elementary schools, but we still are under COVID. And then scenario number 4 is Princeton plan plus COVID. So I didn't want to show 4 different budgets. So this budget is without COVID, meaning that everyone is fine starting September of next year and we go to regular school. So based on that, I'm going to start with my budget. Any questions? No. Thank you. Next. So we're going to start with revenues and fund balance. I made it very simple so you can see the difference between one and the other one. And we're going to start with fund balance. Fund balance under status quo will decrease 62% to $1.2 million, while fund balance in Princeton plan will decrease 89% to $350,000. You will ask why one is different than the other one. Is because we are trying to avoid peaks and valleys in the following year. If I put $1.2 million to the Princeton plan this year, the tax levy will be an increase of 3%, but then next year the increase will be 9%. So what I'm trying to do is try to smooth out over time the tax levy increases. The cessation fund this year is going to be $8.4 million, like we said. The pilot payments will decrease 32.3%. In both cases, the same, because it has absolutely nothing to do with the type of school that we have. Same the RESCO payment. State aid is going to be different. State aid, I'm hoping it's going to go up 3.5% because of the building aid from our new project. However, for the Princeton plan, because transportation will take more miles, we're expecting state aid to increase 6%. And finally, sales taxes will increase the same, 41%, and that's because of the increase in Westchester tax last year that I didn't take it into account in last year's budget because it happened after the budget. Any questions?
Yeah, you don't think our sales tax increase will go down because of COVID and people being home and not spending?
I think that in the contrary, because if you look at your Amazon bill every time you buy anything, it it has the price of the item plus the tax. That tax is the Westchester tax. So it's during COVID, people have been spending a lot more money in goods than in services. Some of the services don't pay taxes, all the goods pay taxes. So I think that it might be even higher, but at least 41%, and that's because the tax rate increased last year by from what was it, 7 to 8%.
So if you're getting your toilet paper and paper towels delivered through Amazon, then we're getting tax benefit from that?
Yeah, you are paying your tax, your Westchester tax. That's why if you see it, every time that you order anything online, besides they need your address so it can get to your house, the second reason they need to do it is so they can calculate based on the county that you live, what's your tax. And then they have to send the tax to the county.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was assuming our sales tax revenue would be going down. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions on this slide?
Next, here you can see the non-property tax revenues, meaning all our revenues without the tax levy. And again, you can see cessation fund, $8.4 million. Our pilots only $16.3 million compared to last year of 24. So I just wanted to show you here how it works, how our non-property tax revenue works. Next. Basically, the same graph. The only difference is, as you can see, is that state aid is more because of the transportation aid, and the fund balance is less because of what I explained in the past. Next. So now let's talk about, before we start with expenditures, is there any questions about revenues? Okay, let's start with expenditures. Here, the same. Under status quo, we will maintain all academic and support programs the way they are, with 3 elementary neighborhood schools. Under Princeton plan, is going to be the same 3 elementary school, all academic and support programs, but in a grade level based elementary school. On the status quo, we will maintain the same number of teachers that we had last year, because this year we had to add 5 teachers to help us with the COVID problem. So that's different. And obviously under the Princeton plan, we're going to reduce 13.5 FTEs in teachers because of the reductions that we will have given the type of grade level elementary school rather than neighborhood. So also I'm taking into account, like I said before, that no COVID expenditures will recur. So that means that the $200,000 in PPE and equipment, the teachers that we hire for COVID, everything that was related to COVID is not going to happen next year. Based on that, under the status quo, our increase in TRS and ERS is going to be approximately $250,000 compared to, and I cannot see it in my, compared to $153,000 if we go to the Princeton plan, and this is because of the reduction of the 13.5 FTE. The increase in Social Security will be $79,000 compared to basically the same for Social Security due to the reductions. Decrease in health insurance under the Princeton plan due to the reductions compared to $144,000 increase due to a 1.5% increase in health insurance for next year. And what we discussed before, there's going to be an increase of around $100,000 in the transportation, because now instead of going to your neighborhood school, you're going to have people from Blue Mountain going to BV, from BV to Blue Mountain. So we estimate that the increasing cost of transportation is going to be $100,000. However, we also estimate that the state aid is going to increase by $150,000. So it's going to be about a $50,000 net revenue for us if we go into the Princeton plan. Any questions?
I just want to weigh in real quickly to remind everybody that the projected reductions of 13.5 include not just elementary teachers, but elementary programs. So that includes reading teachers, art, music, PE. So what happens is we build the school, we build staffing around a potential organization. School A has K and 1, school B has 2 and 3, so on and so forth. And then based on our current enrollment and enrollment trends, we would build the staffing around that. So that's not just elementary teachers, but special education program, reading, art, music, everyone. So it's important to know that it would not be 13.5 just elementary teachers. It's folks connected with the elementary program.
I actually did have one question. All of our assumptions so far are that we have no COVID expenditures that are going to reoccur, which is a pretty big assumption. What if we get to March or April and it looks like the vaccine rollout is really slow and we're going to still have to do COVID related activities at least through the fall? Do we have I'm sure you have a contingency plan. What are we gonna
Yes,
do?
actually we have a contingency plan, but obviously we will have at that point, we will have to have a discussion with the board and with the community about adding fund balance or increasing the tax levy due to COVID. Let's say that we agree that it's only for that we will be with COVID for the September to December portion of the year. Then we don't have to spend $900,000. Why? Because the teachers only will be there 3 months, because we already spent in the equipment necessary for the disinfection. We will not need that much PPE equipment. So if that's the case, we will have to add about $400,000 to either of these 2 budgets.
Okay, thank you.
Next. So here are your biggest increases and decreases. As you can see, the big difference is in teacher salaries. How if we stay under status quo, next year our teacher salaries will increase by $607,000. And I'm assuming a 0% increase in teacher salaries, compared to a decrease of about $430,000. ERS will be the same, because at this point we still don't know, or we're not taking into account any teacher aides or teaching assistants that we might be able to access. So at this point, we just left the same. This number also is going to be reduced, because today we had a conversation and we think we can reduce some of the teacher aides and teaching assistants. Health insurance, if we stay the same, it's going to be $144,000 more because of the reduction. Now it's going to be a decrease in health insurance. Same Social Security. Workers' comp is the same, basically, because workers' comp would pay a flat fee, and those 13.5 teachers make very little difference in our workers' comp payments. And then unemployment is the same in both cases, because like I said, even in the case of the Princeton plan that we excess people, we're going to have so much money, tremendous amount of credit from the Labor Department from the excess unemployment that they charge us for this year. Any questions?
Yes. The ERS and TRS, the ERS showing no change. We wouldn't have any change. We wouldn't expect anything there, or no?
Like I said, in ERS, it's the same for both, because up until today, we don't expect any excess in teacher aides, teaching assistants, secretaries, or custodians. So under both cases, they will keep the same salaries. That's why the increase is the same in
Okay.
ERS.
Okay, thank you.
Next. Here, as always, we all, by law, I have to present the budget by the administrative portion, by the program and capital portion. That's by law. So that's what I'm doing here. The administrative portion, it's an increase in the status quo and the Princeton plan of 2%, because again, we won't change any of the administration for either or. The program is where, again, you see a much larger increase in the status quo, again, because of the reduction of teachers, because of the reduction in teachers. And capital, again, is the same because we're not doing anything different in capital. So there you have a status quo budget that will be of $84.6 million compared to $82.7 million. Any questions? Next. So let's go to the preliminary budget and projections, please. Our preliminary budget under the status quo, as I said, is 84.6 compared to 82.7. That's a difference of $2.4 million compared to $558,000 compared to last year. So the percentage increase in the budget under the status quo is 3% compared to 0.7% under the Princeton plan. This gives us a preliminary tax levy of 49.5 for the status quo and 48.3 for the Princeton plan. So here you can see the big difference under the status quo. The tax levy increase will be approximately 7% compared to 4.4%. And if you remember from last year's discussions with the board, we're very close to the numbers that we told you, very, very close. And going forward, I'll show you in a second, the difference are less, but still the difference are substantial between one and the other one. Next. Here you can see the long-term projections under the status quo. The non-property tax revenue is, again, all the revenue besides the tax levy. As you can see, you have a fund balance that it's going from 3.1 to $1.2 million, the reduction of 61%. The pilots, a reduction of 32%. And then the cessation fund, that is an increase of the $8.4 million. That gives, with a proposed budget of 84.6, that's an increase of 3%, and the tax levy that we just discussed of 7%. The contingent budget, in case it fails twice, it's going to be $81.3 million. The way we calculate the contingent budget is the non-property tax plus the tax levy from last year. And that would be 81.3. And under this case, we will have to cut $3.2 million from the budget. For the 2 following years, 22-23 and 23-24, you can see that there's a reduction in non-property taxes in both years. However, the proposed budget increased less at 1.9, and the contingent budget is basically the same. So basically, if the following year we go in contingent budget, we will have to cut $6.5 million. Basically, so you can see the proposed budget between 22-23 and 23-24 is very similar, and that's because that's when our $17 million bond matures, or it matures in 22-23, so we don't have to pay that portion of the bond that year. So in that sense, that's why you see a small increase in the proposed budget. Let me go through the Princeton plan, and then you can ask me any questions, because this is a difficult graph to understand. In Princeton plan, again, our non-property tax revenue decreased 4.1%, but our proposed budget only increases 0.7%. Our tax cap is the same because it has nothing to do with how we organize ourselves. And our contingent budget will increase 1.4%. So if we go under contingent, here we will need to cut $2 million. If you can see our proposed budget the following year, it's only an increase of 2%. Proposed tax levy increased 4.9%, and contingent budget basically the same. And then the following year is basically the same. So that's how I calculate my long-term projections. And now I'll take any questions that you have, because it's a lot to think about.
Go ahead, Alex.
So like budget 101 for the new girl here, and also maybe for community members who don't, so like my personal budget, if I don't have as much income coming in, I have to start cutting things. So I'm not going to go to Starbucks, or I'm not going out to dinner. When I'm looking at either the Princeton plan or the status quo budget, our budget goes up every single year. And how do we justify that number going up every single year when we know we have less money coming in?
Well, that's a great question. But again, I can tell you several important parts of our budget that we don't control. Health insurance. For example, this year, and I'm part of the board of our organization, our consortium for health insurance. We thought that every school district, and we are 16 school districts in our consortium, that we couldn't handle more than that. So our increase is 1.5%. The problem is that health insurance this year is going to be $11 million. So it's our biggest expenditure, and I have to pay because I have to pay the health insurance of every employee and every retiree because it's in their contract. So that's number one. Number two, the teachers' retirement system and the employee retirement system. The teachers' retirement system is last year was 9.5%. I'm sorry, this year is 9.5%. We're expecting it to be 10%. So again, even if we can control how much we increase the salaries of the teachers, that in this case is 0. Instead of a teacher that makes $100,000, instead of paying $9,500 from teachers' retirement system, we need to pay $10,000. Also, obviously, under our agreement with the teachers, all the teachers that are in steps, they move a step. So those steps are in average 4%. So any teacher that is in step in average gets a 4% increase. And there's nothing we can control on that. So you see that we have very, very little control on our major expenses. That's why, you know, one day you can, like you say, well, I'll stop going to Starbucks, I'll stop doing this, I'll stop doing that. I can't. It's, for you, it's like saying, I'm going to stop eating. You can't. You know, it's part of your household expense, no matter what. You might be able to cut on Starbucks, but not in food.
I mean, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. So you're saying if we want to cut our budget, we need to look, that's when we have to start looking at programs or the Princeton plan and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Right, and let me extend your analogy a little bit further, Allie. If you are at a place where, you know, you're not starving, you're living comfortably, you've got your budget, and you know your budgetary numbers are going to increase, you've got a couple of options as a family too, right? You can go to your boss and ask for a raise, or you can start working another job. So that's sort of like asking the community for more tax levy, or finding other sources of non-tax levy income. So if we go to contingency budget, if the community says, nope, I'm not giving you a raise, then you have to cut back even further, and you might be buying day-old bread rather than that day's bread.
Thank you, very helpful.
Actually, if I can add, I dropped off. I had a technical difficulty here, but you know, although you can't just ignore the contract, Allie. That's not a short-term change, but the contract could be negotiated to change the increases Enrique was talking about. But that's typically every 3 or so years that a contract is negotiated, and it would have to wait for that time frame and change as part of that. We can't just unilaterally change people's pay rates.
And again, one of the problems, Bill, is that obviously the biggest portion of our salaries come from the teachers. And even with a 0% increase in teacher salaries, their total salaries increases by 2.8% just because of the steps. And then you also have lanes. So even if we wanted to control that we're doing it, the increases are there.
Are you suggesting that we change the steps and lanes?
But you cannot change the step on lanes without negotiating that.
Well, that's what I'm saying. As part of the negotiation process, should we be considering that?
And this is a good time to let everyone know that we are currently in negotiations with the teachers union. That's those are discussions that are held in private, and we believe we'll be meeting with them again this spring. But that all of these concepts that we've talked about are part of the calculus in trying to, Allie, back to your question, trying to control short-term and long-term known expenses. And the other thing I would just say, Allie, going back to your point is, when Indian Point closed, it came with mixed reactions because there were some who felt it was unsafe or environmentally unfriendly. It doesn't matter. The math and the strength of the Indian Point pilot, remember, Indian Point paid 30% of our budget. in 5 years from now, Indian Point is going to pay maybe 1.5% of our budget. So two things make up that difference. Increasing revenue from other sources, which cessation fund, county sales tax, taxing the spent fuel, and increasing taxes on ourselves as residents. Or you reduce your expenses by investigating things like the Princeton plan or different programs and opportunities and things that have made our district a destination district. You now start to put price tags on. We as a board, I'll say maybe over the last eight years, we haven't had to have that discussion because the Indian Point pilot was so financially strong for us, and our average tax increase over those 8 years averaged 1.04%, the absolute lowest of any suburban Westchester district. So when we had a known revenue, 30% of our revenue, 25 million coming from Indian Point, we could make long-term projections and make multi-year decisions. Now that Indian Point is gone, that benefit is not available to us as much, and that's why our budget last year, this year, and for the next number of years is going to be a conversation about tax increases or reducing programs. Because as Enrique said, some of the major drivers of expense increases are out of our control. The ones that are in our control are what opportunities do we want to provide for 2,400 kids and at what cost?
Any other questions before we move on?
No, I was just going to make one more point. I think benefits also increase every year, like your medical insurance goes up year over year. And I think that's a pretty significant cost to us that also we can't control. Is that correct?
That's correct, because again, we can control a little bit of it, because so you should know the consortium has a big fund balance. So we are trying to use some of that fund balance in the consortium, and that's why this year our increase is only 1.5%. I'm sure if you look at how much your increase at Pepsi was, you can see that for sure it was more than 1.5.
No doubt.
That's what I'm saying. So
yeah,
not as a school district I can control it, but I can control it as a little bit as a board member of our consortium, because I vote for the increase. And for example, this year I voted for the 1.5. Actually, everyone, it was unanimous. But there's years that some people feel that it has to be more, and other people feel that it has to be less. And that's part of what I do. You know, I look at our interest, the interest of the consortium, the interest of the school district, and then that's when I decide how to vote on the increase.
Thank you.
So interesting time. Any comments, any questions? I'm here to answer.
I'd like to thank you for doing these two budgets. It's very helpful to see them side by side, especially as we as a board and the community are trying to decide on whether we're going to adopt a Princeton plan organization or not. I know our advisory team is in the process of that, as we heard earlier.
Yeah. Like I said before, as long as we make a decision before March 31st, I'll be happy to maintain these two budgets until we decide which one is the correct one for the community.
Any other questions? Allie, your question was excellent. It set off a really good conversation. So anybody else? All right, thank you very much. Okay, so I think that ends our budget discussion for this evening. Thank you, Enrique. We'll be having budget discussions pretty much every board meeting from now until the budget vote. So stay tuned. Our next section on our agenda is our audience comments section. Carmen, has anybody written in any audience comments?
Good evening, everyone.
I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? No.
Yeah,
Yes, you can hear me?
Yes,
I
yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Good evening. Yes, there were no audience comments today or this evening.
Okay, thank you very much. Which brings us to board comments or new business. Anybody on the board have anything else they want to bring up before we close for this evening? Looks like not. All right. We will not be having a second executive session this evening, so I need a motion to close the meeting.
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Right.
Aye. Thank you very much. So our next meeting will be Wednesday, January 20th, and we hope to see you there.
Good night.
Good night.
thank you. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Right.